Jessica stood in front of the glass doors of the luxurious restaurant, where her sister Jenny's baby shower was taking place. She glanced inside, observing the wealthy women laughing and chatting, champagne glasses glittering under the chandelier's soft glow. The atmosphere exuded extravagance, with pristine white tablecloths and pastel blue floral centerpieces adorning each table. Everything about the event was flawless, from the elegant decorations to the exquisite menu. And yet, Jessica knew she didn't belong here, not because she was unworthy, but because her family had never truly acknowledged her. She adjusted her light gray silk dress and checked her reflection in the glass. Her makeup was subtle yet refined, and the pearl necklace around her neck shimmered softly, a gift she had given herself when she opened her first restaurant 10 years ago. It was a symbol of her success, a testament to the hard work she had poured into her career. But to her family, none of that mattered. They still clung to the belief that she worked at some small pub, a narrative they had created and spread without ever bothering to learn the truth. Jessica stepped inside and handed her invitation to the receptionist. The woman behind the desk gave her an assessing look before scanning the guest list. Jessica wasn't surprised by the scrutiny. She could easily guess how her name was listed: the younger sister who works at a pub. She offered a polite smile, accustomed to the condescending attitudes of her family. Inside, the event was in full swing. At the center of it all was Jenny, glowing like a model fresh off the pages of a fashion magazine. Her meticulously styled hair, her designer maternity dress, and the dazzling diamond necklace, a gift from her investment banker husband, James Clark, made her the perfect image of upper-class elegance. Standing beside her was their mother, Carol, dressed in an expensive outfit, her hair and makeup impeccable as always. They belonged to a world Jessica had never been welcomed into, a world they fiercely guarded, ensuring only those who fit their mold could enter. "Jessica, you actually came?" Carol's voice carried a mix of surprise and mild disappointment. That tone, Jessica knew it too well. It was the same tone her mother had used countless times throughout her life, the unspoken message always clear: she was unwanted. Jessica simply smiled, unfazed. She had spent years enduring that exact sentiment from her mother. Their meetings were rare, maybe once or twice a year, and every time, Carol's gaze would sweep over her, searching for proof that Jessica was still a failure, still an embarrassment to the family. She turned her attention to the seating arrangement, scanning the neatly arranged name cards on the tables. One after another, she read the names, but Jessica Wilson was nowhere to be found. It didn't take her long to realize that this was no accident. The omission was deliberate. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Jenny's group of private school friends whispering among themselves, their gazes flickering toward her with barely concealed amusement. "Is that the sister everyone talks about? The one who works at a pub, right?" The words were spoken just loudly enough for Jessica to hear. But instead of feeling humiliated, she simply sighed. 10 years had passed, and nothing had changed. Jenny finally approached, her voice laced with artificial warmth. "Having trouble finding your seat?" she asked sweetly, though her eyes betrayed her amusement. "We had a last-minute increase in guests, so we had to prioritize the important ones." Jessica understood the message instantly: she was not important. She never had been. But Jenny wasn't finished. Her expression brightened as if she had just thought of a brilliant idea. "Oh, why don't you try that little pub across the street? It might be more your style." Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Carol stepped forward with a smirk. "Yes, dear, that would be perfect for you." Jessica inhaled slowly, steadying herself. 10 years of struggle, of success, of building something from nothing. Yet, in her family's eyes, she remained the same disappointment she had always been. But she wasn't that naive girl anymore. She wasn't someone who would crumble under their sneers and scorn. She smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "That's a great idea," she said smoothly. "Enjoy the baby shower." With perfect posture, she turned on her heels and walked out of the venue, her high-end heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear the murmurs of gossip and the satisfied laughter of her mother and sister. What they didn't know, however, was that the game had only just begun. Because the time for the truth to be revealed was fast approaching. As Jessica stepped out of the Grand Hotel, she took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air wash over her. The soft glow of Boston's cityscape stretched before her, and just beyond the towering buildings, she could make out the location of the Hidden Gem, her restaurant, her empire, the place she had built with her own hands over the past 10 years. While her mother and sister laughed triumphantly behind her, thinking they had successfully humiliated her, they remained blissfully unaware of the reality. Jessica was not just a simple restaurant worker. She was Chef Liz, the owner and executive chef of one of Boston's most exclusive fine dining establishments. Nestled within a beautifully restored red brick building in Beacon Hill, the Hidden Gem was a sanctuary of culinary excellence. With only 20 seats, each night was an intimate affair reserved for those who truly appreciated the artistry of fine cuisine. The restaurant's interior blended timeless elegance with modern sophistication, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over antique wooden tables, handcrafted porcelain plates perfectly complementing the delicate arrangements of food that adorned them. Every detail, from the curated wine list to the meticulous plating of each dish, was a reflection of Jessica's unwavering pursuit of perfection. Despite being one of the most sought-after restaurants in the city, the Hidden Gem did not advertise. It did not rely on social media influencers or trendy promotions. Instead, it thrived purely on word of mouth and elite recommendations. A reservation wasn't just a matter of calling in advance, it required a letter of introduction from an existing patron. Even Boston's wealthiest individuals, investment bankers, and Ivy League professors struggled to secure a seat. The exclusivity only made it more desirable. Yet, despite its prestigious reputation, Jessica had kept her identity hidden from her family. To them, she was still the black sheep, the disappointment, the sister who supposedly worked at a pub. And she had allowed them to believe that because their approval had never mattered to her. What mattered was the respect of her peers, her customers, and the food critics who had recognized her genius long before her own mother and sister ever would. That night, as she crossed the street toward a quiet cafe, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, a message from the Michelin inspectors confirming their upcoming visit to the Hidden Gem. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. The world would soon know what her family had ignored for a decade. A week later, while having breakfast, Carol flipped through the pages of the Boston Globe, as she did every morning. However, a particular headline caught her eye, making her pause mid-sip of coffee. The Hidden Gem, Boston's culinary treasure. Accompanying the article was a full-page feature showcasing the restaurant's stunning dishes, each plate a masterpiece of flavor and presentation. Her eyes widened as she skimmed the paragraphs, reading about the exclusive dining experience, the restaurant's 2 Michelin stars, and its world-class reputation. At that moment, Jenny, who was sitting across the table, noticed her mother's expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaning in. Carol turned the newspaper around, pointing at the feature. "Look at this article." Jenny's eyes quickly scanned the page before they landed on a particular name, Chef Liz. "The Hidden Gem," she murmured. "Isn't that the restaurant that's impossible to book?" Carol read further, her hands trembling slightly. Chef Liz, also known as Jessica Wilson, is the brilliant mind behind the Hidden Gem. After training in France under legendary Michelin-starred chef Jean-Pierre Durat, She returned to Boston 10 years ago and quietly built what is now considered one of the city's finest dining establishments. Silence filled the room. Jenny's face paled as she reread the words. She fumbled for her phone, searching for more information. Every review, every article praised Chef Liz's innovation, discipline, and sheer culinary genius. Her dishes were described as a perfect harmony of classic French technique and New England flavors, her restaurant a hidden oasis for intellectuals, artists, and the elite of Boston. Even Harvard's president was a regular guest. Their mother's hands clenched around the newspaper. The truth was in front of them, undeniable and humiliating. The sister they had mocked, belittled, and pushed aside was not only successful, but had already secured a place in the very social circles they desperately aspired to join. Feeling lightheaded, Jenny opened her baby shower photos. She stared at a picture of Jessica's back as she exited the venue that night. Back then, she had thought Jessica looked defeated. But now, seeing the image again with new understanding, she realized it wasn't the posture of someone ashamed, it was the posture of someone with quiet confidence, someone who had already won. This can't be real, Jenny whispered. But it was. And for the first time in her life, she realized they had never truly known Jessica at all. Carol had always prided herself on her ability to read people, to distinguish between those who belonged to high society and those who were merely pretending. But as she stood on a quiet street in Beacon Hill, staring at the hidden gem, she realized how blind she had been when it came to her own daughter. The restaurant was nothing like what she had imagined. From the outside, the beautifully preserved red brick building exuded understated elegance, a stark contrast to the overly lavish, attention-seeking establishments she and her friends frequented. The large windows were frosted just enough to obscure the view inside, heightening its air of exclusivity. But it wasn't the building that held Carol's attention, it was the woman stepping out of the luxury car parked at the entrance. Jessica. Even though she wasn't dressed in designer clothing, she exuded an effortless elegance that not even her sister Jenny could match. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her every step purposeful. As Carol watched, a renowned artist, someone she had seen featured in countless magazines, walked beside Jessica, speaking to her with warmth and familiarity. "Jessica, another incredible meal," the artist said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "I was moved again today." Jessica smiled, not the forced, polite smile she used at family gatherings, but one filled with quiet pride and authenticity. "The honor is mine," she replied. "Thank you for coming." Carol stood frozen in place. The scene unfolding before her was so vastly different from the image she had carried of her daughter all these years. Then, from inside the restaurant, a group of staff members emerged, bowing slightly as Jessica passed. Their expressions were filled with respect, not just the usual professionalism shown to an employer, but the kind of deep, unwavering respect reserved for someone truly great. At that moment, a man in a crisp white chef's coat approached her. He looked to be the sous chef, judging by how the other staff deferred to him. "Chef," he said quietly, regarding today's Michelin inspector visit. Jessica nodded, her expression calm. "Proceed as usual," she responded, her voice firm yet composed. Carol's breath caught in her throat. "Chef." The word echoed in her mind, forcing her to confront a truth she had ignored for a decade. The daughter she had dismissed as a failure was, in reality, one of the most respected chefs in Boston. And she had been too blinded by her obsession with social status to see it. Later that evening, Carol sat at home, reading and rereading the Taste of Boston article on the Hidden Gem's 10-year anniversary. Every word felt like a slap to the face. Jessica wasn't just successful, she was extraordinary. She had trained in France, worked under Michelin-starred mentors, and built a restaurant so exclusive that even Boston's wealthiest couldn't simply walk in. Her name was spoken with reverence in the culinary world, yet her own mother had never even uttered it with pride. Just then, Jenny called. Carol could tell from the trembling in her daughter's voice that she had also seen the article. "Mom," Jenny whispered, "what have we done?" The weight of their actions, of years of dismissal and mockery, settled heavily in Carol's chest. And for the first time, she felt something she had never expected to feel toward her daughter: deep, aching regret. For days after the revelation, Carol and Jenny could not shake the weight of their shame. They had spent years dismissing Jessica, belittling her accomplishments, and treating her as an outcast. And yet, she had risen above them all, building a legacy that their carefully curated social circles could never touch. Carol had tried calling the Hidden Gem, desperate to secure a reservation, but each time, the response was the same: a letter of recommendation was required. When she finally mentioned her relationship to Jessica, hoping that family ties would grant her access, she was met with polite but firm rejection. "The chef has requested that you follow the normal reservation procedure." It was in that moment that Carol understood Jessica was not simply ignoring them. She was teaching them a lesson. Then, one evening, an envelope arrived at their home. Inside was a letter written in Jessica's elegant handwriting. "True value lies not in superficial decoration, but in essence. If you are ready to understand that, then prove it." At first, Carol and Jenny had no idea what the letter meant. But a few days later, a second letter arrived. An invitation not to dine, but to work at the Hidden Gem. "If you truly want to understand, start from the bottom. To appreciate essence, one must begin with the basics." Carol and Jenny stared at the words, their pride urging them to refuse. They had spent their entire lives striving for luxury and status. How could they possibly lower themselves to work in a kitchen? But deep down, they knew they had no choice. 3 months after giving birth, Jenny stepped into the Hidden Gem's kitchen for the first time, not as a guest, but as a dishwasher. Her perfectly manicured nails were soon chipped and ruined by hours of scrubbing, her hands raw from the heat of the water. She had never imagined herself in such a position. She who had once spent her days at high-end boutiques and country club brunches was now washing plates until her arms ached. Carol, despite her age, took a position in the dining room as an assistant, ensuring water glasses were refilled and learning the delicate art of hospitality. For the first time in her life, she had to serve rather than be served. At first, they expected Jessica to offer them some kind of special treatment, some acknowledgement that she saw their effort. But she didn't. She treated them exactly like any other employee: no privileges, no shortcuts, no warm words of encouragement. When Jenny complained about the exhausting hours, Jessica simply said, "Things of value take time to understand." It was humiliating, grueling, exhausting. But slowly, something began to change. As Jenny spent more time in the kitchen, she started to recognize the passion behind each dish. She saw the precision, the dedication, the artistry that went into every plate served at the Hidden Gem. For the first time, she realized food was not just about luxury, it was about soul, effort, and creation. Carol, too, underwent a transformation. As she watched customers' faces light up with delight at Jessica's dishes, she began to understand something she had never grasped before. True value isn't about prestige or status, it's about impact. It's about bringing joy to others in ways that go beyond wealth. And that was something Jessica had understood all along. 6 months into their work, Jenny finally got the chance to taste one of Jessica's creations during a staff tasting session. The moment she took a bite, tears welled up in her eyes. Because in that dish and the delicate balance of flavors, the warmth, The quiet complexity she tasted 10 years of Jessica's pain, struggle, and perseverance. It was not just food. It was a story. A silent, unspoken conversation between two sisters who had spent years on opposite sides of the same world. For the first time, Jenny truly saw her sister not as a failure, not as an embarrassment, but as someone extraordinary. And she finally understood why Jessica had made them work for this realization. Because true understanding cannot be given, it must be earned. One night, after a long shift at the Hidden Gem, Carol and Jenny found themselves in the restaurant's dimly lit dining area, exhaustion settling deep in their bones. The past year had been the most difficult of their lives, not because of the physical labor, but because of the reckoning it had forced upon them. They had walked into this restaurant thinking they were humbling themselves for Jessica's approval. But somewhere along the way, their perspectives had changed. Carol no longer saw hospitality as mere service. She saw it as an art, a connection between the chef and the guest, a way to offer warmth and comfort beyond words. She had spent decades obsessed with social prestige, convinced that wealth and status defined a person's worth. Yet here, in the softly glowing dining room of her daughter's restaurant, she saw something infinitely more valuable: respect, admiration, and the quiet, undeniable proof of Jessica's success. Jenny, too, had transformed. The woman who once judged the world through designer labels and exclusive invitations now found beauty in the precision of a perfectly plated dish, in the careful balance of flavors, in the patience it took to create something truly extraordinary. That night, as they were cleaning up, Jessica called them over. "Starting tomorrow," she said, her voice even, "shall we meet as family?" The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. For the first time in over a decade, Jessica wasn't speaking to them as employees, as outsiders looking in. She was welcoming them back into her life, not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as an acknowledgement that they had finally begun to understand. Jenny felt her throat tighten. Carol wiped at the corner of her eye. They had been waiting for this moment, not an apology, not even an embrace, but a chance to start anew. The following Sunday, the Hidden Gem opened for a private brunch, a rare occurrence for a restaurant that usually only operated for dinner service. The long wooden table in the center of the dining room was elegantly set, but there were no extravagant floral arrangements, no towering centerpieces, no overly elaborate decorations. Instead, simple wildflowers in a glass vase adorned the table, their understated beauty mirroring the quiet grace that now defined their relationship. This time, there were no guests dressed in designer gowns, no whispers of judgment, no competition for status. It was just Jessica, Jenny, Carol, and the newest member of their family, Jenny's 18-month-old daughter. Jessica moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing each dish with the same dedication and care that had made her a world-renowned chef. But today, she wasn't cooking for critics, for Michelin inspectors, or for elite diners. She was cooking for her family. As she brought out the first dish, she set it in front of Carol and Jenny. "This," she said softly, "is how I feel." Jenny took a bite, and for the second time, she felt tears fill her eyes. Because the meal, its flavors, its warmth, its quiet complexity held no trace of bitterness or anger. Only love. Carol, who had spent years seeing food as nothing more than a symbol of status, now understood it as something far deeper, a language of its own, a way to communicate emotions that words never could. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, not just of the food, but of the moment itself. For years, they had tried to force Jessica into the mold of their world, one of shallow approval, of appearances over authenticity, of conditional love. And when she had refused to conform, they had cast her aside. But Jessica had never needed their validation. She had built something greater than they ever could have imagined. And in the end, it was they who had needed to change, not her. That morning, as sunlight streamed through the restaurant's windows, they sat together not as a broken family struggling to repair old wounds, but as people who had finally come to understand what truly mattered. Jessica had not granted them forgiveness in words. She had shown it to them in the most profound way she knew how, through her food, through her actions, through the quiet, unwavering strength that had always been hers. And for the first time in a long, long time, they were truly a family.